longtime college basketball analyst for CBS, Len Elmore. Len, good morning.
Morning. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for joining us. You know, there's two schools of thought of this year's NCAA tournament, that there's a ton of teams that can potentially win the championship. There's a ton of parity. And then others that feel like that's a little overblown. There's still only kind of a handful of great teams out there that can do it. Which camp do you fall into?
I'm one of those guys that really believes that there are some teams that we haven't really talked about over the last decade that have an opportunity. I mean, having watched Dayton play, I think that they're a very worthy candidate. I look at in the Pac-12, Oregon is another team that I think has a terrific opportunity. And then you're looking at some of the teams in the AAC, like Houston. There are some teams that haven't been spoken of that aren't in that upper echelon of blue bloods that may have an opportunity, no question.
The ACC tournament begins later on today. 12 versus 13, Wake versus Pitt. 11 versus 14, Virginia Tech versus UNC. Those are on the ACC network. And in the ACC, Virginia won a national championship last year and then kind of floated through the regular season, although recently they came on and finished as the 2 seed in the ACC. UVA's defense is a problem for a lot of people. What did you see from the Cavaliers first half of the season versus second half of the season?
I think in the first half they struggled to find out who their go-to people were on offense. They have a tremendous array of guys that aren't feature guys, but they play together so well. But it all begins with a young man at the point, Kihei Clark. I mean, he's a guy that understands how to play, plays with intelligence, and the rest of the guys follow. The big man in the middle, Jakite, he's another guy that has tremendous talent and is kind of underrated. Ability to put it on the floor, can shoot the jumper, protects the rim on the other end. Once they figured out who their go-to guys were, I think that their defense has always been constant, and that's what's kind of carried them to where they are.
Len Elmore joins CBS, breaking down some bracketology as we go into major conference tournament week here on the DA show. So tomorrow, the Big Ten basketball tournament begins, and Indiana's going to be playing on day number 1, the 11 seed versus the 14 seed Nebraska. Indiana is at risk for yet another season without the NCAA tournament. What's been the biggest problem for a usual basketball blue blood for trying to get things on the right track and getting back into March?
I think Indiana's young. I think that's part of the problem, and the consistency or lack thereof. And you can attribute that to up and down defense more than anything else. I mean, they've been able to beat some teams when it seemed like they were not in the picture. But more than anything else, I think Arch has had a problem getting them to play consistently, particularly on the defensive end.
And, this is a program that hasn't been that Final Four stature in a long time. What can you attribute that to?
It really comes down to talent. It comes down to getting players. And let's not listen to the hyperbole when guys are signed and they come in their first year. And they lost a couple of good players over the last year or so. But bottom line is you got to be able to recruit. And I just don't think that they've recruited the talent that you would expect to come to Indiana.
Len Elmore joins us looking at this week's bracketology. Michigan State is the 2 seed of the Big Ten tournament, and Cassius Winston is once again their big kind of focal point on the team. When you watch Winston, how much of a difference maker can he be in the Big Ten tournament and then in the Big Dance?
I think he's a tremendous difference in his ability to understand how to attack opponents and also to play the defensive end. I mean, the things that he does are very subtle in many ways. We can look at his stats and look at his assist numbers. He's scoring a lot better than he has over the years because he's been expected to do that this year. But, when he sets up guys and doesn't necessarily have to make the final pass, but gets people in position to score. As somebody who loves the team game, I just marvel at what he understands and how to get people involved. And again, as I said, when you call on him to score, he's been able to really deliver. That's not to say that other guys like Tillman particularly or Rocket have been able to contribute, but it all begins and ends with Winston. That's the positive and the negative, because without him in the ball game, I think Michigan State is going to struggle. So he's got to be able to find a way to stay out of foul trouble.
As I mentioned before, Big East tournament begins tomorrow night, and number 1 seeded Creighton is going to get the winner of St. John's Georgetown. And a Creighton-St. John's match will be interesting because just a week ago, somehow St. John's, one of the worst teams of the conference, blew out Creighton at Carnesecca Arena. How do we explain the best team in the Big East getting blown out by 20 against one of the worst in the conference?
Well, I don't know if people agree with me, but I'll tell you what. They played that game at Carnesecca Arena, and Carnesecca Arena is very intimate. It seems like the fans are right on top of you. The walls are closing in as opposed to playing in larger arenas. And I think that has an impact on opponents coming in there. I think they were 10-2 this year in Carnesecca Arena. So, when we talk about them not being a good team, I think they played extremely well within those confines. And when you look at Creighton, they weren't able to knock down any shots early, and then they started to press. And under the pressure that St. John's applied, I think they got even more desperate, if you will. And the flip side of it is St. John's practices there. They play in that gym all the time. They shot lights out a way that you would never expect a team like that to be able to shoot. And the reason I know all of this is because I did that game for Fox. I was sitting there and saw exactly what was going on. But the problem with Creighton going forward is that Marcus Zagorowski is not going to play in the tournament. He's got a meniscus problem.
Len Elmore joining us this morning here on the show on CBS Sports Radio. The ACC might only get 4 or 5 teams to the tournament, which is a far cry from what it has been in recent years. In your estimation, why was the ACC down this year?
Again, it comes down to them recruiting tremendous talent and then losing them to the draft and some to transfer portal. I mean, it comes down to when you have those abundance of riches, it's only a short window because you have so many kids that wind up wanting to leave early. And those, particularly, say, Virginia, they keep guys till their 3rd and 4th year. It takes a while to be able to acclimate the young players, and that's why it took them a while to rise to the top. But I think that's a bigger reason. And the fact that so many young players now don't necessarily have to go to the ACC or some of the major conferences to get on television to be discovered and to be followed by scouts, et cetera. So, the ACC is kind of pulled back into the pack for a lot of those reasons.
Pac-12 tournament is going to begin tomorrow, and the 1 seed of the Pac-12 is Oregon. Is it the Ducks and then everybody else? Is there a gap between the Ducks and the rest of the Pac-12?
I think so. I know that, teams like UCLA have come on strong as well as USC. But, I think Oregon has been absolutely terrific. I had them in the tournament last year, and they've got some tremendous play. Guard play is so important in the NCAA tournament going forward and even in postseason tournaments. And I don't think there's a better guard in that conference than Peyton Pritchard.
Finally, if this is kind of a wide-open tournament, do you have a dark horse? Is there a team maybe a little under the radar that you could see doing some damage in the big dance?
When you say under the radar, as I said, we talk about a lot of these teams that haven't been spoken of in the NCAA tournament in a long time, the Daytons and the San Diego States, et cetera. And even though they'll wind up on the top lines, 1 or 2, maybe 3, people aren't expecting them to do any damage. But I think Dayton is one of those teams that could hurt some folks early and get on a roll. I look at the hottest team in the Big East is Providence. And, that's a team that has the ability. They play with a great physical presence. And if they're shooting the ball really well, they're hard to deal with as well. I can see some other teams out there, but, those are the kinds of teams, I think. Winthrop is another one of those teams. If they shoot lights out, they have a chance to get past the first weekend as well. So, it's tough to mention dark horses these days simply because there's so much parity in college basketball today.
Yeah, that's understandable. Len Elmore joining us this morning on the show, one of the best players of his generation in the ACC, longtime college basketball analyst for CBS and Fox, joining us this morning on the show. Len, it's always great to pick your brain. I appreciate it very much, man. Thanks so much, and enjoy the tournament.